She got sick of the constant moaning and the drama, so she had to flee. And can you blame her? Can you really blame her? Because Doria Ragland has stayed massively loyal to Meghan. Sometimes that things aren't great between Meghan Markle and her own mother, Doria Ragland. She has been completely miserable in the last couple of public appearances that the fake Duchess forced on. Meghan Markle howled, "Don't leave me," as her mother, Doria Ragland, moved out of her and her hen-pecked husband, Prince Harry's Montecito mansion, RadarOnline.com can reveal.
47 minutes. That's how long Piers Morgan's latest interview lasted, before the internet allegedly erupted into what observers described as complete chaos. The broadcast went live at 9 p.m. London time on a Tuesday, prime viewing hours, and by 10 p.m, Meghan Markle's legal team had reportedly sent cease and desist letters to 3 separate media outlets.
A class or a lesson in gaslighting, or whether Meghan Markle has absolutely lost her mind, or maybe it is the fact that she's able to get away over and over and over by flaunting her lies, most serious lies.
Not warnings, not requests. Full legal threats demanding immediate retractions of content that hadn't even been published yet. And it all starts with a single question, so innocently phrased, so deliberately simple, that Piers' guest, a former palace staffer whose name was kept confidential, allegedly hesitated for a full 8 seconds before answering. What did you actually see during your time working near the Sussexes? The answer that followed, according to viewers who recorded the segment before it was allegedly pulled from streaming platforms, was not what anyone expected. Not vague palace gossip, not second-hand rumours, but specific incidents with dates, with witnesses, with details that insiders say matched internal palace records that were never meant to go public. Meghan's team moved with speed that sources described as unprecedented. Within 90 minutes of the broadcast, her attorneys had reportedly contacted the network, the production company, Piers Morgan personally.
Because maybe if she says them over and over, she will convince herself and manage to convince idiots to still give her a platform that she did.
And most tellingly, the guest who'd appeared on the show. The message, according to people who saw the correspondence, retract, apologise, or face immediate legal action. But Piers didn't retract. The guest didn't apologise. And by midnight, the story had spread too far to contain. Screenshots circulated, audio clips emerged, and the questions being asked weren't about whether the interview happened. They were about why Meghan's response was so aggressive, so immediate, so desperate to silence something before it gained traction. Harry was in California when the broadcast aired. According to sources, he was completely blindsided. Hadn't known Piers was doing this interview. Hadn't been warned about what would be discussed. When his phone started buzzing with alerts, messages from old friends, texts from palace contacts, he allegedly pulled up the interview on his laptop and watched in frozen silence as details of his marriage, his wife's behaviour, and incidents from their palace days were discussed in specifics he'd never heard publicly aired. His hands were shaking by the time the video ended. And the first call he made wasn't to his publicist or his lawyer. It was reportedly to Meghan, who was allegedly already on the phone screaming at her legal team about how this happened, who allowed it, and why they hadn't stopped it before it went live.
And the family, the royal family, the palace, is now finally willing to take action in the worst possible way for Meghan Markle. And talking about lies, I'm just going to show you a couple of things here.
The guest on Piers Morgan's show was identified only as a former member of palace staff who worked in close proximity to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex during their final months as senior royals. No name, no photo, voice reportedly altered slightly for anonymity. But the specificity of the claims suggested this wasn't someone on the periphery. This was allegedly someone who'd been in the room, who'd witnessed conversations, who'd seen things that contradicted the public narrative Meghan and Harry had carefully built. The interview started with general questions. Atmosphere in the palace during the Sussex tenure, staff morale, the relationship between different royal households, standard territory that had been covered in numerous books and articles. But then Piers shifted, leaned forward, and allegedly asked, were there incidents involving the Duchess that staff witnessed, but were told never to discuss? The silence stretched. Then the guest spoke. There were multiple occasions, the source allegedly said, voice steady but quiet, where staff members reported feeling intimidated, not threatened physically, but emotionally. There were raised voices, demands that couldn't be met, and when those demands weren't met, there were consequences. Piers pressed for specifics. The guest provided them. One incident, allegedly occurring in November 2018, involved a disagreement over wedding planning for a close friend. Meghan had reportedly wanted specific flowers, peonies out of season, requiring special orders from abroad at significant cost. When a staff member explained the logistical challenges and suggested alternatives, Meghan allegedly responded by calling the staffer incompetent and demanded they be removed from working with her. The flowers were ordered. The staffer was reassigned. And according to the guest, the incident was documented in an internal HR complaint that was later allegedly sealed when the Sussexes left royal duties. Another incident, this one from early 2020, reportedly involved Meghan's interactions with palace communications staff. The guest described a situation where Meghan allegedly wanted to release a personal statement without palace approval, a breach of protocol, and when communications officials explained the proper channels, she reportedly went over their heads directly to more senior officials, claiming the staff were obstructing her voice. The frustration from the communications team was palpable, the guest allegedly explained. They were trying to do their jobs, following protocols that had existed for decades, and they were being painted as villains for it. These weren't new allegations entirely. Similar claims had surfaced in British tabloids during the Sussexes' final months in the UK. But hearing them stated plainly, with specific timeframes and contexts, allegedly gave them weight they hadn't carried when they were just tabloid whispers. Piers then brought up what he described as the most serious allegation, a claim that Meghan had allegedly been warned multiple times about breaching palace data protection policies by keeping personal copies of confidential correspondence and documents. According to the guest, these weren't public records or personal letters. These were allegedly internal palace communications, staff emails, and strategic planning documents that should have remained within palace systems. When she left, the source claimed, there were concerns about what documentation she'd retained: digital files, email records, things that could be used later as leverage or insurance. That claim hit differently than the others. It suggested premeditation, planning, the deliberate collection of material that could be deployed if needed. And it raised questions about where that documentation was now, whether it had been used in the couple's subsequent interviews and projects, and what else might still exist that hasn't been revealed. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from Meghan's alleged treatment of junior staff, young women in their 20s who reportedly left positions crying, to her relationship with Kate, which the guest described as frosty from the beginning, with very little effort made to bridge that gap. One particularly damaging claim involved the much-discussed bridesmaid dress incident. The guest alleged that there were multiple fittings, multiple attempts to accommodate Charlotte's comfort, and that Kate had been extremely diplomatic in raising concerns about the fit and timing. But according to this source, Meghan had allegedly responded to those concerns by suggesting Kate was being difficult and using her daughter as a proxy for her own feelings about the wedding. Kate was hurt, the source claimed. Really hurt. She'd tried to help, to be supportive, and it was thrown back at her as hostility. None of these claims could be independently verified. Palace records are sealed. The people involved have signed non-disclosure agreements. But the pattern the guest described, of a woman who allegedly struggled to adapt to institutional constraints, who pushed back against any limitation on her autonomy, who collected grievances and documentation as protection, aligned with narratives that had circulated for years. By the time the interview concluded, social media was already erupting. Hashtags trended, clips circulated, and Meghan's team, according to insiders, went into full crisis mode. The first cease and desist letter allegedly went to the network within 45 minutes of the broadcast ending. It claimed defamation, cited specific statements as false, and demanded immediate retraction and apology. But notably, sources say the letter didn't specify which statements were false, just that the interview as a whole constituted an attack on Meghan's character and reputation. The second letter went to Piers Morgan personally. It reportedly accused him of perpetuating a campaign of harassment against Meghan and warned that further comments could result in legal action. Piers' response, according to people who saw it, "See you in court." The third letter went to media outlets that had begun reporting on the interview. Standard legal intimidation, warnings about republishing defamatory content, threats of liability for spreading false information. But several outlets ignored the warnings and published anyway, calculating that the story was too significant to suppress and that Meghan's legal threats might not hold up under scrutiny. Behind the scenes, sources say Meghan's reaction was described as volcanic. Phone calls to lawyers that allegedly lasted hours, demands for action against the guest, against Piers, against anyone who'd enabled the interview to happen, and questions. Repeated, insistent questions about how to make this go away. But it wasn't going away. The interview had been watched live by hundreds of thousands. It had been recorded, clipped, and shared across platforms, and the more aggressively Meghan's team tried to suppress it, the more attention it received. Harry's role in all of this reportedly became contentious. Sources close to the couple claim he wanted to issue a joint statement addressing the allegations directly, either confirming or denying specific claims. But Meghan allegedly insisted that engaging at all would legitimise the interview and give it more credibility than it deserved. That disagreement allegedly led to a tense conversation. Not quite an argument, insiders say, but close, where Harry expressed frustration that their strategy of ignoring attacks wasn't working, and Meghan maintained that legal action was the only appropriate response. The palace, for its part, said nothing. No comment, no statement. No defence of their former staff member or condemnation of the interview. Just silence. The kind of silence that royal watchers know is itself a message. The institution wasn't getting involved. Whatever fight Meghan wanted to pick, she'd be picking it alone. 3 days after the broadcast, the guest appeared on another programme, this time with more details. Allegedly emboldened by Meghan's aggressive legal response, the source provided additional context, more specific incidents, and copies of what they claimed were redacted internal memos documenting staff complaints. The memos, if authentic, showed a pattern that corroborated the interview claims. Multiple staff members raising concerns about workplace environment, HR interventions that allegedly went nowhere, and senior palace officials reportedly deciding it was easier to reassign complaining staff than address the core issues. One memo, dated March 2019, allegedly stated, 3 staff departures in 6 weeks is unprecedented for this household. Exit interviews indicate consistent themes regarding management style and expectations. Recommend immediate review. That review, according to the guest, never happened. The Sussexes left the UK before any formal investigation could be completed, and the documentation was allegedly sealed as part of the departure negotiations. Meghan's lawyers sent another round of letters. These ones reportedly threatened. The second broadcaster demanded the memos be proven authentic or retracted and accused multiple parties of coordinating a smear campaign. But the legal threats were starting to lose impact. Too many letters sent to too many outlets made the strategy look desperate rather than justified. The fallout from Piers Morgan's interview didn't end with legal letters and media coverage. It allegedly sparked something more damaging, a reassessment of Meghan's narrative by people who'd previously been sympathetic. Within a week, 3 different royal commentators who'd defended Meghan in the past reportedly began questioning elements of her story. Not wholesale rejection, just careful hedging, acknowledgement that there may be more complexity to these situations than initially understood. Language that suggested doubt had crept in. One commentator, speaking anonymously, allegedly explained their shift. When someone responds to allegations with immediate legal threats rather than denials or explanations, it makes you wonder what they're protecting. If the claims were completely false, why not just say so directly? That sentiment spread. Forums that had been pro-Sussex strongholds saw members expressing uncertainty. Social media supporters found themselves defending against specifics rather than dismissing vague attacks. The conversation had shifted from, it's all lies, to, well, maybe some of it happened, but context matters. Meghan's team attempted to regain control by leaking positive stories to friendly outlets. Her charity work, her business ventures, stories about her being a devoted mother and supportive wife, but the timing made them feel reactive rather than proactive, damage control rather than genuine coverage. The most significant shift allegedly occurred in Hollywood. According to industry insiders, several production companies that had been in discussions with the Sussexes about potential projects reportedly put those conversations on hold. Not cancellations, just pauses. But in an industry where momentum is everything, a pause is often terminal. One production executive, speaking off the record, allegedly said, "The drama is starting to outweigh the value." Every project becomes about their personal controversies instead of the work itself. That's not sustainable. Harry, caught between defending his wife and managing his own reputation, reportedly began having private conversations with old friends, people from his army days, childhood mates he'd drifted from. What he allegedly told them, according to sources who heard secondhand, "It's more complicated than it looks, but I love her, and I have to protect her." Those friends described him as sounding tired, worn down, like someone fighting battles on multiple fronts without ever getting to rest. Meanwhile, Piers Morgan showed no signs of backing down. In subsequent appearances, he doubled down on the interview, claimed he had more sources willing to come forward, and suggested that what had been revealed was just the beginning of a larger story about Meghan's time in the palace. Whether he actually has more sources remains unclear, but the threat of additional revelations allegedly keeps Meghan's legal team on high alert, monitoring his every appearance, ready to respond to any new claims before they can take root. The most haunting detail emerged weeks after the initial broadcast from someone who'd worked with the couple's security team. They allegedly described arriving at the Montecito house the day after the interview aired to find Meghan pacing, phone in hand, making call after call, trying to get someone, anyone, to make it stop. But it hadn't stopped. And sources say it won't stop, because regardless of whether every specific claim in Piers' interview was accurate, the narrative had shifted. Meghan was no longer just the victim of palace machinery and tabloid cruelty. She was now someone with former staff willing to speak out, with documented complaints, with a pattern of behaviour that couldn't be dismissed as pure fiction. The cameras show a composed Duchess, launching businesses and attending events. The legal letters show something different, a woman fighting to control a story that's slipping further from her grasp with each new revelation. And in the quiet spaces between cease and desist letters, between legal threats and PR strategies, the questions multiply. What else did palace staff witness that they haven't yet discussed? What other documentation exists that hasn't been leaked? And how many more interviews will Piers Morgan conduct before Meghan's lawyers find a way to stop him? The interview lasted 47 minutes, but the damage, sources say, will last far longer. In those 47 minutes, a carefully constructed image allegedly cracked wide enough that people could see what might be underneath. And once that crack appears, no amount of legal letters can seal it completely. Somewhere in Montecito, Meghan allegedly continues making calls, writing statements, strategizing responses. And somewhere in London, Piers Morgan reportedly smiles, knowing he struck exactly the nerve he was aiming for. The meltdown isn't over, it's just beginning.